episode 100 of Strange Brow Radio. I'm your host, Tobe Johnson, and we released this episode early. Happy Halloween to all the ghouls and boys out there. Hope you're up to no good. Trick or treat, that whole scene. I think I'll be out at Manresa Castle when this episode comes out, so maybe there'll be some news posted up on Facebook or the strangebrowradio.com site. So stay tuned on that, but we have a real treat for you. Here in a moment, episode 100, I will be playing a members-only conference that we had this year. I'll tell you more in a second. We'll be right back. All right, so episode 100, full moon, Halloween, thin veil, certain sense of responsibility to really bring it for the listener. So I think we've done that. I'm okay with that. I'm just worried about you and the possible knock at the door of a young child without his mask on. That might be the scariest thing in a post-COVID world here. So maybe look out the window first and break out the Lysol and the antibacterial wash before you even think of giving them a treat. Maybe hand out little packets of zinc or something like that. Vitamin D, that'll make them smile. Or just give them a free mask. I don't know what you're going to do. We live out in the woods, and yeah, we get knocks on the wall, but there's never anybody standing there, so not much we can hand them. But that's not what we're here to discuss. So what do I have for you here? Well, I knew I had to play something pretty damn good, so I better have pretty damn good speakers on here, and I do. And the members have already listened to this. In fact, they've watched it, because it is a webinar that we did back, I believe, in March or April of 2020 with retired Colonel John B. Alexander and author Thom Powell. We're talking Skinwalker Ranch and Sasquatch. You know it, you love it, and so let's bring more of it. And that's what we did. Now, I couldn't have done any of this without the producer of then Midnight in the Desert, Michelle Freed, and now the producer for Tim Weisenberg's show Midnight FM, which I believe Shannon LeGros is also co-hosting of Into the Fray. So Michelle, brilliant producer, brilliant mind, and a well-known and well-resourced and well-worked remote viewer. And we did some remote viewing previous with Michelle Freed, so certainly a capable teacher, and has worked with John B. Alexander in an unofficial capacity, and that's as much as I know. So Michelle is also on the stream with us. Now, this is a segment, a 2-hour segment of the video. The entire audio and video can be found for the members only, and at the end of the broadcast, I'll have more to say about that and what's going on after the 31st and how you can find us and all that good stuff. But happy Halloween wherever you are. Let's get to it. Skinwalker Ranch is how we begin, and we end up in a mishmash of Sasquatch and parallel worlds with Thom Powell. We're going to go ahead and get started here, and along the way, people that join into the chat, join into the audience, thanks for coming to our first real Zoom meeting, organized Zoom meeting with Strange Brow Radio and the Butterfly Effects Center Today, of course, we're going to be talking about something incredibly popular to an audience that looks at this is the Skinwalker Ranch. And we have retired Colonel and Dr. John B. Alexander, as well as author Thom Powell. And if you don't know Thom Powell's work, I strongly suggest you look it up. You can find that all over the interweb under the name Thom Powell, Thompowell, and that will be towards the second and third hour. So without further ado, thanks for being with us, John.
Oh,
Yay,
thanks
John.
for having me.
You bet. So rather than this be a typical interview, which is the way I usually do a show, is a back and forth with somebody, since we have PowerPoints, and everybody give me the thumbs up or let me know if you have any kind of issues seeing what the presenters are talking about along the way here. You can message me. But I'm going to step back as much as I can stand and let you guys have the floor. And without further ado, unless anybody has any words in the beginning here, Michelle, are you ready to go?
I am ready. I am so excited and so glad that everybody is joining us. This is a great idea for, replacing conferences that we can't get to, and still getting to, it's incredible having this kind of technology where we can still hear from, people that we want to hear from. And hopefully we will continue to do this, and we would love if you guys spread the word so we can continue doing this.
Perfect. And of course, along the way here, guys, if you have any questions for me, you can shoot me a chat, as we said here. And if you have any questions for the speakers, shoot me a chat as well. And towards the end, I will get to that. But without further ado, go ahead, Colonel.
Okay, have you got the screen?
We see the screen.
I see it.
Okay. I can't tell because I have it up. Yeah, great to be here. Hate to say it, but I think I'd rather be, we're supposed to be leaving to sail on the Caribbean today. So it was one of the trips that got canceled. So anyway, we got asked, I thought I would begin with is...
I think I just lost John.
Okay, John. Now, hold on a second here.
I'm thinking
Your
that
signal's
maybe
a little bit spotty, John, so start over again and take it from the top after the Caribbean.
Excuse me 1 second. Let's turn off the cameras while John's speaking because that uses bandwidth.
Okay, let's go for that.
Okay.
Good idea. That's a Toby thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, are we ready?
We're
Yeah,
ready. Go
that
ahead.
you might have a point there.
Particularly safe, I guess we would say. This slide that's up at the moment is one that I use in all of my presentations to show what my biases are. And having studied all of these phenomena, if you'll notice, of course, remote viewing ions is the International Association of Near-Death Studies. I was past president on that. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was the head of my doctoral committee, and he and Raymond Moody were the ones who brought forth the whole topic of near-death experiences. On there you can see a shaman. We've dealt with shamans all over the world. In fact, recently back from Central Asia, which was quite an interesting experience. PK, the metal bending things, as you know, we used to teach PK metal bending for all the dolphin indicates interspecies communication. Did some interesting work with dolphins and later with humpback whales in the open ocean off of Tonga, firewalking. We did that. UFOs, of course, spontaneous healing. I say even this, talking about cryptozoology, which is going to be a main focus in the later part of the presentation. And we may join and say one of the interesting experiences we had One of the things I use here is
Lost John.
and with
There we go.
shamans. I've talked in Iquitos, Peru, several times, the International Amazonian Shamans Conference, and of course, remote viewing. And that smiling with me is, of course, Joe McMonigal. Now, what I find amazing is how many of these groups are just isolated and they don't know about the other groups or understand the interconnectedness of it. I do think these are the Bigelow, and was established in 1995. And he wanted to talk about or study two specific areas. One of them was UFOs, of course, and the other was life after death, or what I prefer as a continuation of consciousness. And that ran until 2004. Now, I was the first member of NIDS, but I was only part-time. I had already retired twice, once from the Army and can't keep up with that. So I worked with them part-time. I had left, I think around 2001, because by 2003, I had been in Afghanistan. Now, one of the key things about NIDS, this is the Science Advisory Board. I won't go through all the people that are on there. That's me hiding right there. Some of you know Dr. Auth, of course, and a number of others. But the point is that these were all, basically world-class scientists. And the interesting aspect was that they were all open-minded. Many of them did not choose to be known to the outside world or really be exposed. The list has since been put up of all of these members. But the idea was that NID staff, that I'll get to in a minute, would go out and study a variety of projects, and about quarterly, the group would come together and have various presentations on the observations that had taken place. This is the main people. There were a few more from time to time. The upper left is Colin Kelleher, who was the administrator, or I guess technically the deputy administrator. Bob held the job himself. Colin was an immunologist. In the lower center was with one that was with me and Jacques Vallée. And George was actually a double doctorate, and but DVM, or Doctor of Veterinary Medicine, which we'll see is significant with some of the things that we'll be discussing shortly. So we're going to talk about the ranch, and I just, often I use this as a single slide, whatever Skinwalker is. I would mention that during the entire time I was there, we were discussing it. Never heard it called Skinwalker Ranch. That is kind of a name that got picked up later and came along.
It was the Sherman Ranch, right?
Well, for a long time, yes. When Robert Bigelow bought the ranch, he from Terry Sherman. While Terry's name, Terry and Gwen, were not known to the public. And in fact, in the book, The Hunt for the Skinwalker, you'll see that there's, I think they call him Gorman, in that book. But it was the Sherman Ranch, and he had it previously. But the point is, and we'll discuss as much you want, but very, very, very strange things happened at the ranch. And some of them were related to UFOs. Now, just for tell folks where you are up on the map, and location, it's not the exact location of where it is, but again, you're looking at the state of Utah. It's over kind of on the northeast side. You'll see Vernal and Roosevelt, which is not on the map, which I think is around in here. So it'd be somewhere around in this area. Recommend you don't go, but if you ever want to see a neat place, you see the Dinosaur National Monument. Really quite a fascinating place that happens to be in the area. So it's been fun. So when we were there, this is the and this is looking to the south, and what you see, of course, is very, very flat terrain, and then you have an escarpment or a mesa that goes up 100, 200 feet, something like that, and that runs along the whole north. And then farther to the north, you can see the other mountains in Utah. But the ranch stops a little bit beyond the top of the ranch or the top of the mesa. A little closer, you can also see the house in there. I'm not sure who took these. I will mention, and of course I'll come to George Knapp in there, but I owe him that gratitude, because frankly I can't find a number of my pictures, and he was able to provide a number of them to me. Again, this wasn't there when I was there, but the fencing. But it gives you see the scrub stuff, and out here a lot of Russian olives that are there. This is the old home. When the Bob bought the ranch initially, this building on the left side of your screen was the only thing that was there that was currently in use. And there were a number of things that were really quite strange. And Terry had bought this building from a previous owner as well. And they noticed that there were locks on the inside, locks on the outside. There were big chain links out there where they would chain, the previous owner would chain dogs to be able to protect the entranceway. What you see to the right side of the screen there is basically it's a double wide trailer, and that's what Bigelow brought in, and that everything was operated from. We had cameras that were looking 24/7, doing time-lapse photography. Everything came back under the ground and into that trailer there. There was also bedrooms where the staff would stay when we were up there. Again, this is some pictures of, there's several old buildings that are off to the west side of the ranch. And you can see this in high trees, and this is obviously in the fall, but he had these old dilapidated buildings, and a number of very unusual incidents happened around those buildings. Here's a picture. It's obviously one George gave me. And this is Colin Kelleher again. It was up there in Georgia. Again, lots of kind of the key. This is about in the center of the ranch itself. And what's interesting, there'll be one of the tales I'll talk about is an incident that happened through basically the treetops here. This is just a photo of the full moon at the ranch itself. And this is yet another building that's out there. Again, this is, I think they call it the third homestead now, out further to the rest. And what you can see is this is relatively close to the escarpment is up. And a number of the observations we had, we would set up there at night. I might mention that I was actually with Bob Bigelow the day that he bought the ranch, and I was the first one to spend the night there. And that's what I had done, is I had sat up on the top of the ranch there looking down, and basically the main thing that happened was a lot of mosquito bites, at least that particular night. One of the things that, as we evolved on there, decided that we would like to get some live sensors, because it did appear that a number of the incidents that happened, the animals in the area were sensitive to something. So what they did is put these towers here within them, and this is a dog kennel. And they kept them in there, but it was also the cameras were placed so you could see them happening. In these things, we would put basically toys, games, and things like that up there to see if they would be disturbed. Some of this is all of what you saw if you're familiar with the Rollo, Missouri cases that went on, to see if things would be perturbated. I think one of the things that's interesting and important is that the ranch has always been a working ranch. So, you know, at the time, even when NIDS had it, there were always cattle there and meandering, you know, on their own, as to they could move any place that they wanted to on the ranch. But these were fixed sites where we could keep, of course, many of the things happened off camera, and there were some things that happened on camera, but this was done so that we could ensure that the animals would be, the dogs in this case, would be on camera.
About what year were you doing this?
Well, again, I bought it in 96, so through, well, I don't know, again, it's
Okay.
picked up, so it's ongoing
Late
now.
90s on. Okay.
No, that was the beginning, yeah.
Oh, okay.
96.
Got it.
I'm going to start with this case, a little gruesome picture on there, but it's one of the most fascinating cases in my mind when you get into physical evidence of things happening. And what had happened, this is a May morning, and it's calving season. And so Terry goes out. And as you've seen, the area is very flat. It's just flat, open area, except for the escarpment to the north. And so he's driving out, and calving season, he runs around, finds a calf, particular calf, they tag it in the ear to identify it to the mother. They tag it and weigh it and whatnot. So he then leaves and goes about 200-300 yards away, again, perfectly open, mid-morning, bright sunny day, as you can tell, and finds a second calf. And he tags that and he weighs it. And the elapsed time is about 45 minutes. He comes back and he finds this calf in the condition that you see here. You know, almost all the body parts are missing. It's also exsanguinated, and what you don't see there is a lot of blood. And that was quite amazing because people told us, okay, well, what probably happened is that the bloods went into the dirt. And our George O'Nett, the DVM that I had mentioned earlier, was flown out of the scene got there in a few hours. By the way, as soon as this was found, Terry covered it to protect it so no other predation could take place. Also, as you can see, the ear here where the tag had been on was sliced off and just and again, you have 45 minutes, wide open area. You look at predation. Yes, there are big cats in the area, rare, but they are there. There are bears, but no animal attacks and kills in this moment. Most of them will, if they make a kill, will drag the animal off and the carcass and hide it and come back and eat it. But not figure out how this, one of the hypotheses that keep going, well, this was human intervention. They shoot cattle rustlers. This is going to happen in broad daylight and humans are going to somehow sneak across this open field and do this just makes no sense. Now, if you want in the really bizarre, of course, this case was presented to the science board and we looked at it in considerable detail. Best you can come up with is the things that happened to the animal did not happen at that location. It happened someplace else and animal was returned. But again, when you have this very short period of time during which that could have occurred. One of the things I wrote about in a couple of the books that I came up with in looking at this was something that I called precognitive sentient phenomena. And that was at the ranch, and we'll talk about some of the other things that happened shortly. It was as if and I do not know how to describe whatever it is, but that it was, and when I say it's precognitive, it meant that whatever this is doing, presenting these phenomena, knew how we were to be aware of the research efforts before the incident occurred. And then everything would happen as you would gear up to study these phenomena. It would say, oh, you like that? Try this. And you get something that's, like completely different and unpredictable. And yes, there were playful aspects to it. Again, the biggest thing is that it, whatever it is sentient and is in control. Now, this is not totally new. And I use some of the examples here because throughout human mythology, you find the notion of the trickster or trickster gods. And I use the examples here. You have Loki with the North gods, Kokopele and the Navajo, Pan in Greek. But again, whatever it is, it's running the show. You aren't.
Quetzalcoatl is another one from the Mayan.
Well, like I say, it is universal.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this has changed a bit. When I say don't go there, this is what the entrance looks like today. A friend of mine happened to stop by, and this is the outer area. You can see back farther, where the other fences kick in. There are a number of interviews that are online now that you can interview. I saw one lengthy one with Thom Winterton, who is now the manager of the ranch. I guess superintendent is technical title. And what they point out is that the new owner has taken the work that was done by NIDS and moved it actually to a new level. The kind of instrumentation that's available there. And they also have a number of experiments that are out there. And one of the reasons they do not want people coming on board into the area is you could inadvertently end up disturbing experiments, not realizing where instrumentation is and the kinds of things that are the scientific experiments that are ongoing at the time. The warning on it is that not just cited, but you disrupt ongoing incidents, and you may end up paying for it. They'll bring them. And here's an example of the security.
Yeah.
Dr. Brandon about it. He seems to be quite excited. I'm assuming he has already seen, I think, a 6-part series. I declined to participate, but he did say, and I'm not sure exactly what they caught, but they actually did capture some phenomena on camera. So that'll be a part of what would encourage folks to watch this series as it evolves. A couple of books here. First, my book, Reality and I, most one, and the first chapter deals entirely with Skinwalker Ranch. The rest of it, and you can see the subtitle, deals with things that we did all over the world. It's first-hand experience with things that can't happen, but did. And for those who know PK and that, of course, Uri Geller was gracious enough to give me a forward on that. And another book that has probably even more detail much earlier was by Colin Kelleher and George Knapp, and is called The Hunt for the Skinwalker. And there's other documentaries that are out on there, but these books are available and will give you quite a bit of detail on some of the cases. Let me do the stop share here.
Hey, John, we can see maybe you're ending your PowerPoint at this point, but we can't hear you.
Could be that somebody
Yeah,
at
I'm
his house.
assuming that most of the audience here are familiar with what skinwalkers are. As I said, it was not Skinwalker Ranch while we were there, and it has a long, long history of unusual events. It was going back decades to hundreds of years. There is some mythology that says that there are both Ute and Navajo tribes in the area, and they had some land disputes, and that the area became cursed, if you will. We do know that Native Americans tend to stay away. This was known as not an area to go to, and they would generally stay away from it. The Skinwalker itself is, of course, mythology. The question is, where does mythology become real? The Skinwalker is it's kind of hard to describe. It has many different attributes, but that it's a beast. Some say it's a shapeshifter, that it can become different types of animals over time, that it particularly prowls at night, that it can, devour humans and do bad things, and definitely something that one wants to stay away from. I might mention that many of the people up there have mentioned that during incidents that they have, this notion of fear, even though sometimes it's not physically present, you're not looking at something, but still the presence of fear has taken over them. There was an interesting comment when we were warming up that I figured you know, hitchhikers, I guess you called it, because that was one of the things that has come up repeatedly. I might mention I've never had personally a negative experience. One of the things I think that I did notice is that certain people tend to be more sensitive to the events that are ongoing there. In our case, I think it was Eric Davis who was the most sensitive to that. I mentioned there's a picture of trees and people, you know, in the high trees. There was a particular incident that happened. I'll recall them and Eric were out near the center of the ranch itself. And while they're there, if you've seen the movie Predator, it said it was like something was moving through the trees where you would see a distortion, but nothing clear. It's not like a clearly defined animal or something that would be moving through the treetops in some way. This was at night. And Eric is the one who got the impression, a distinct impression of a voice talking to him and said, "We are watching you." And he's one who several times back at the trailer and whatnot would be sensitive to things being around, often not seen. I don't know, where would you like to go? Would you like some of the incidents or questions or what?
Right. Yes, absolutely. Well, specifically, I want to go to a comment that you made to Jesse Ventura when he came out to the ranch, which I imagine was quite humorous. And one of the things I think you said to him is that he would be quite bored. Explain what you meant by that.
Yeah, that was quite an experience. It was very interesting. I'll back up just a little bit. First of all, the reason I agreed to the interview had nothing to do with Skinwalker Ranch. This is kind of a warning about what program producers will do to you. But what had happened is they said they wanted to talk about civilians in space. And by this time, Bob had created Bigelow Aerospace, which made sense. And also Burt Rutan, who was a legendary aviator, was a good friend of mine. He's the guy who put Mike Melville into space and won the X Prize and whatnot. So that they wanted to talk about that was fine. So anyway, they came and we interviewed for a couple of hours. And at the end, one of the PAs calls in from the side, what about Skinwalker Ranch? Now, it's interesting. I'm responding to some of the comments. People said it looked like I was scared because I was getting up. Now, I thought the interview was over and I was reaching behind to take off the mic pack at the time. I wasn't afraid of it. And so the comment to him was, well, I thought we agreed not to talk about that because we had talked about what we would and would not discuss before the show. So this guy pops it live. And I said, well, I think the quote was something like, what would you say if there were aliens there working for Bigelow? And I'd say, well, your bullshit filter doesn't work very well. Yeah, no, Jesse, well, what if we go up there? And I think one of the important thing is, particularly for people who go up and observe, a vast percentage of the time, absolutely nothing happens. Now, that does not negate that these very, very strange things happen. And some of the things that happen to us and are continuing. And when you stack up these events and you look at them, in a short period of, as if it happened in a short period of time, you go like, wow, this must be really exciting. as opposed to all of the incidents, and we can discuss some ones that happened. They absolutely did happen, but they're spread out over years. So I was talking to Jesse that, hey, you think you're going to go up and jump on the ranch and, a goblin's going to jump out and grab you or whatever, that's probably not going to happen. And so I told him, yep, you would be bored.
Another question here has to do a little bit with remote viewing and deep meditation as far as seeing source. What has been done in that way and what is being done in that way, especially with the new ranch owner?
I can't speak to what the new ranch owner has done in that vein. Joe McMonigal was up at the ranch. I mentioned his remote viewer 001 did some of the things for Bob. I don't recall of anything totally significant, and certainly not anything that would initiate, say, cause and effect, which is obviously what we're looking like. What's doing this? How do we get involved, and how can we control these things? A number of people have meditated on it, and it does not seem to either change the type of event or come up with any kinds of definitive answers as to what's causing these strange events. Might be useful to talk about some of the incidents that we did see. Now, I mentioned two. One, of course, is that calf, and that's one where you have a lot of physical evidence that substantiates that something very, very strange happened, and you cannot explain it with any prosaic answer. One that also had a lot of physical evidence. As I mentioned, the ranch is set up to be instrumented and time-lapse photography. What we had were poles that were about 20 feet high, TV cameras sitting on top of the poles, and they were looking to the west. And as it turns out, we had cameras that are out here and cameras that are behind. So camera one is looking at camera two. There are a number of cameras like that, but for this particular thing. Now, so the camera is up on top of the pole. It's wired in, and then the wires come down, and there's about half a roll of duct tape on each one of those. And it comes down to a PVC pipe, and then it goes underground and back to the trailer where it's being recorded. And then what would happen is we weren't always there, but the cameras, the recording would always be viewed. And it was, by the way, there was about a second and a third between frames, just so you know what the time frame is, which is sort of important. But in this one particular incident, what happens is that all of a sudden, a camera, the wires going into the camera pulled out. What's coming down, the duct tape that I mentioned, is missing. It is totally gone. Now, anybody who's worked with duct tape knows that stuff is really sticky and very adhesive, and getting rid of it is difficult. There were PVC U-clamps holding the thing in before it went into the ground. Those are pulled loose. In the middle, there is a chunk of about 3-foot chunk of wires that are just totally cut and been missing. As it turns out, the incident occurred at a time when the cattle happened to be right around the pole where the incident happened. Now that's significant because the cattle don't move. And what we do know is if anybody approaches the cows, they would scatter and run away. So we know when the incident occurred because that's when the TV feed stopped. So you know exactly when at least part of it happened. And the point is that the camera one that was looking at camera two, nothing there. And so if you think all of that stuff would have to have happened, if it's happening in physical reality as we know it, within a second or third, with no people, nothing disturbing the animals in the area, and absolutely physically happened. I mean, this is in the really totally bizarre, but one where you have, physical manifestation of incidents happen. The one that I mentioned out in the tree area, okay, that's potentially subjective because it's, what's the sensing of the individuals of this thing moving through the trees and things like that. But you have these other incidents where it's physically hard. Now, another one that happened that, again, with our people involved, and again, we're talking about scientists here, all PhD level trained observers and whatnot. It was in the winter and they went outside at night looking around, and Terry was there at the time. And to the east side, they see some cattle down there, and he's shining a light. And up in this tree, eyes are shining back. You know how red eyes as the light hits, and they're pretty far apart. So whatever it is up there is big, and one of his cattle was down below. So he gets his rifle out, pretty damn good shot, and this is very short distance, fires at whatever that is. It drops out of the tree, or at least the lights go out and disappears. When we look, there's no tracks, but a tracker in. One of the most interesting things is there's a snowbank that was there. Again, it was winter enough. And what you see is a single footprint that looked like a gigantic raptor, a la The Lost World, or something of that nature. Found the one track, and that's it. So you had the incident. We had Terry, one of our observers, physically shooting something, a physical footprint, and just disappears. And a number of these, that's one of the things that happens, just disappears. And it wasn't there.
Another question here. We have loads of questions too, and along the way, Thom, if you want to chime in as well, I'll squeeze one more in here. Kevin Carney asks, is there any method or methodology you have found to trigger an event? Would you advise trigger an event?
Short answer is no. And the events seem to be controlled by it. Now, one of the things that came up was that you were told not to dig on the ranch. And I've heard that this has been followed up with the current owners as well. But you would come in, we would try to precipitate events, and it basically didn't work. Whatever was going to happen happened at the behest of, I guess, this precognitive sentient phenomena. The phenomena is in charge, and it decides what you're going to see, when you're going to see it, and knows how you're going to respond to it. But we did, that's why people would do meditation. We would do, cleansing ceremonies. You would do a whole host of things, but we never were able to precipitate events, but we were certainly observed them. And we've only had a few of the, truly bizarre ones. One that had happened before we came to the ranch that I think is really quite key. And Terry is out. This was the house that's there is the one that we showed earlier. That he was living in that house, and they were just getting started. Again, a whole series of incidents that were happening, minor stuff like they would go in and put the groceries away and come back, and all of a sudden the groceries are back on the table again. he would take his gloves and put them down, and he'd find them, up in a tree when he wanted. But anyway, he sees this dog walking across the plain. And as it gets closer and closer, they realize that's not a dog, it's a wolf. And as it gets even closer, they say, that's a really big wolf. Now, Terry was a big guy, and well over 6 feet, and wolf's head comes up, like up into his chest. And so they're just petting the wolf and said, well, this has got to be domesticated somehow. So they get tired of that. They got to go back to work. And when they did, they had a corral that was there. And, it has a round, heavy piping. And there was a couple of cattle in there and a calf. And all of a sudden, they hear this yowling sound. And the wolf has reached under the fencing and grabbed a 600-pound calf by the snout and is trying to pull it away. So Kerry grabs a 2x4 that's there they're building and whacks at it, and that basically does nothing. So he's got, I believe it was a .357 Magnum that he pulls out, and at point blank range shoots him in the side, in the thoracic area where the heart would be. That convinces whatever this beast is, the wolf, to let go of the calf, and it goes walking off. And as it does, he's got an elk rifle. Ranchers there keep those about, I think it was 258 grain bullets. It puts it in there, and he hits the wolf as it's wandering away, and chunks of stuff fly off the wolf. But it goes over down into a ravine and just totally disappears. So they went and they tracked it, and the tracks go out there, and all of a sudden the tracks just stop. But also importantly is they go over and they pick up the residue from the wolf that's been, removed by the bullet, and it's putrefied, or it smells as if it's putrefied. Now, how that would happen in a few minutes, again, no logical explanation for that.
Some more questions here regarding underground bases. Is there any evidence that there was a facility underground near the ranch?
No.
How far are you from that Dugway Proving Ground?
Oh, hundreds of miles.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
We're on the east side of Utah, all the way across the state.
Cylindrical holes found on the ranch as well. Was this part of the phenomena?
Don't know of cylindrical holes.
Okay.
Now, one of the things to remember, and this is true for the folks that are out there, there's an awful lot of mythology that's been brought out. And the BS factor, like I told Jesse, is extraordinarily high as to what happens and all of that. I should mention, since UFOs are part of it, UFOs have been seen in the area periodically. Earlier, I think you mentioned orbs, and orbs get to be kind of a key factor. In fact, one of the reasons I believe Terry says that he sold the ranch, and what had happened, particularly as it was one evening, they're out there and they see these blue orbs coming down and just above kind of head level. And says the dogs, he had 3 dogs at the time, and they were up yapping, trying to bite at the thing. And it kept moving further and further east, and the dogs kept going with it over towards the Garcia Ranch, which is immediately east of what was in the Sherman Ranch. And the dogs never come back, and that's highly unusual. Normally they would go off, but they would return quite readily. And they didn't. And so he went out looking, and what he found was 3 little greasy spots, which he believes to be the dogs, the residue from the dogs. And what concerned him at the time is they had teenage boys that were having it, and that they were concerned that the boys might do something to agitate whatever was coming with the bulbs, and said, "No, that's enough. We're out."
Regarding the putrefied meat from the giant dog that was killed, was any sample collected, and what became of the sample if it was?
No, as far as I know, no. Remember, this had happened before Bob Bigelow had acquired the ranch. So it's one of the stories. I will tell you, though, because people come out, Terry's just making this up and all that. We emphatically believe him. And we had enough incidents with him. And I think the guy is absolutely straight, the family the same way. Some people say, well, you're doing it for fame. That's ridiculous. He physically lost a lot. One of the things he found was in some of the cattle mutilations and things that happened. He had a variety of cattle, and it would always happen to his most expensive cattle. Can't explain that. But I think the guy is absolutely honest. And I say enough of the incidents occurred with our folks as well. And overall, very detrimental to them, to the family.
Getting back to the mythos here, John, regarding one of the stories that came out is maybe the most odd of them all, regarding 2 hybrid men, part human, part animal, part dog, I think, smoking cigarettes up against a car wearing fedoras. Do you know this story and can tell us more about this?
I do not. I don't. First time I've heard that one.
Oh, really? Okay. Now, wait a second. Yeah. Tom, have you heard this?
Nope.
Okay. Well, I'm all alone. Anybody online, don't leave me hanging. That was a story that snuck out of there.
But, well, again, remember that there's an awful lot of mythology and things that have changed over time. The reality is strange enough, but and that's one of the problems you have in all of these fields, that trying to sort fact from fiction, and you get second, third hand iteration on the stories.
Yes, I think it's in the book, and it's part of George Knapp's story within the book. So I think that's where I got it. That's what I'm hearing too from other people. Another question that came in is: did anybody die, lose their mind, or disappear at the ranch?
No, not that I know of. I have heard. In fact, this superintendent who was there apparently had a life-threatening injury of some sort. I've heard the story from several aspects, including him. He has, I wouldn't mention it, except he has personally put it online as well. And why life-threatening, I don't know, but ended up hospitalized for a period of time. And they said part of the problem was that in the hospital doing laboratory tests, they could not determine what had caused it. And other than whatever it was real, is one of these unexplained illnesses, but very, very serious. Have not heard of anybody losing their mind. I have heard of people, which you call the hitchhiker I mentioned before, that have supposedly taken things home with them that they didn't want to have follow them. I mentioned it was one of the questions Colin asked me. We were in Curitiba in Brazil and had some very strange experiences there. And one of his questions to me was, well, did anything come home? That's one where Victoria literally became possessed in front of several hundred folks. But that is one of the concerns. And I might mention, I've talked to Call about it, that they've been very conscientious about doing cleansing type exercises to themselves, when they're operating in the area and leaving it.
We have a couple questions here regarding cemeteries or burial grounds on or near the ranch. Was that ever something that was looked into?
Not that I'm familiar with.
Okay. And then getting back to the underground base concept, in the world of Bigfoot, we often, take experiencers' testimony that explain there to be some kind of underground activity or machine work. It was reported nearby, for example, in the town of Ording, underneath the story of the Valley of the Skookum by Sally Shepard Walford, where she described having Bigfoot activity, but also hearing drilling or underground mechanics. What about there at the ranch?
Again, nothing underground that I have any knowledge of. No, I get into theories about what had happened, and particularly get into the cryptozoology range. And my personal opinion, this may be something Thom wants to address now or later, but when I said that I'm not sure when you say, where did they go? That's even a useful question. That I think we're looking at things that have, that exist temporally within our area and then cease to exist in consensus reality as we know it. And let me give you one case that happened. This one's pretty well known. Again, our guys, remember that mesa that I talked about? So they're up on the mesa looking down at a dirt road. And what happens is they're getting ready to leave. We were using third gen night vision equipment at the time, and they see this glowing spot that's about 3 feet above the road. And it comes up and it starts expanding and expanding and expanding. And then all of a sudden, it looks like a tunnel inside. This thing comes up, puts its hand, and pulls up head and shoulders, comes up out of the tunnel, jumps down, the light disappears, it goes running off. You go down there and there's no footprints. And this is a dusty road where you would normally expect to find it. And yet it happened again in front of our observers.
All right. Thom, I don't want to step all over you. You're just kind of leaning back and enjoying this. Have somebody else doing the heavy lifting. You got any questions? I've got tons of questions here, but I want to come back to you.
Well, I maybe could delve into some specifics, but in a general way, the kinds of things that I've experienced over the years pretty closely mirrors what John's describing. So I don't want to be a simple yes man to John's point of view, but there is a lot of consistency to my experiences and John's. So I could get into details, but only after John has finished making his point.
Okay, let me go back to a question here. We'll go to Reba Campbell. She asks, question to the UFO incidents. What is the military's thought of saucer-type UFO purpose here on Earth gleaned at the ranch? I guess they know very well that there is a study and money spent that way through Harry Reid. Second question, is there some truth to the OT references based on activity on the ranch? So the question is, I guess, basically, what do we know as far as UFO activity at the ranch as far as purpose?
Purpose. Again, I get back to the precognitive sentient phenomena. We haven't the foggiest idea. I might mention in my UFO book, I'll have to paraphrase, I don't have it here, but the last paragraph goes, it starts out with UFOs are absolutely real, there's no doubt about it. And I end by saying, whatever this is, it is more complex than we imagine or than we possibly can imagine. And again, one of the problems that I have, this is why the second slide, remember, with all the different phenomena, these things are interrelated in my view. I keep getting reminded of a song that goes, I tried to find the reason why, and the reason wasn't why. And so finding the rationale for things that are totally irrational is extraordinarily difficult. That's what I argue, is that we are dealing with something that is, again, research perspective. You had mentioned earlier the Large Hadron Collider and whatnot with the research there. I think we're looking at something that's at least as complex as cancer or AIDS. And yet our approach to it is pretty naive, and trying to understand these things are just terribly, terribly complex and universal, and all societies, all cultures, and around for millennia.
Regarding the portals themselves, was there any understanding at what portals are besides a visual experience where things can pass in and out of?
Short answer is understanding, no. Okay. Potential for existence, yes. The portal is kind of one of the problems we have is applying linguistics, finding a vocabulary to describe the ineffable. And this is true again I think in all of these phenomena. We try to attach values to things that we know to areas that are not known.
One of the theories too, and I'd love to have Thom speak out on this as well, regarding individuals that seem to spike activity. Being involved with this over the last 15 years, it seemed as though there were certain people that would come to places, or people that would pair up where they would amp up their antenna and their experiences with that individual. Did that happen at the ranch?
Yeah, I mentioned that earlier, again, I can't say anything super strange happened during the periods that I was there. But again, the one, Eric seemed to be more sensitive to these kinds of things than some of the other people. But I absolutely agree. Again, I'll bring my wife, Victoria, into this as we travel the world dealing with shamans, and particularly with shamans and ayahuasca and whatnot. But we have very physical phenomena that she's totally sensitive to. But for me, it's just, that's interesting.
All right. Thom, did you want to dig into that question at all? I think that you could probably speak to that regarding pairs of people or individuals that seem to contact the phenomena easier.
Well, after years of grappling with the same questions that John was struggling with and looking for solutions and looking for ways to interact, knowing that it did seem that they, as we studied the phenomenon, it studied us, saw the same indication that, they knew we were coming. In my case, every time I got there, everything stopped. As soon as I left, it started again. It actually got pretty comical after a while. A lot of people said, "Oh, well, the property owners are messing with you," and it's their way of covering hoaxes. I was pretty convinced that wasn't the case, that they were on the level, but I couldn't always prove it. But then, as we got more and more sort of desperate to find something that did work, we stumbled upon the use of what do you call them, sensitives, horse whisperers, people with more acute sensitivities in the whole ghost paranormal realm, and we found that was a big breakthrough as far as a way to reach out to the phenomenon that we're struggling to understand and actually coax out some more unvarnished responses. You know, they got a little bit more overt. One of the sensitive, well, we basically learned ask permission. If you want something to happen, ask. Stop with the tricks and traps. And boy, did that ever bear fruit. Not that we're ever given anything we could take to the bank, but we definitely got more stuff than we were getting previous to that. And one of the sensitives even said they were really impressed that you finally decided to ask permission.
One of the things you might also add in there is, and be careful what you wish for.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, again, there seems to be this genie in a bottle that you can't put the cap back on to this phenomena, to where literally the words spoken and thoughts thought seem to easily go out to the phenomena itself. The directed phenomena out at Cottage Grove is an example of that. And at the end of this lecture here, at the 1 hour, at the 1 o'clock mark, maybe we'll go into more details about what's happened specifically here in the Pacific Northwest regarding a place we call the Al Moon Lab. Thom, why don't we pass it off to you real quick here? But before I do, I want to thank John for his time to do this. Can you hang with us for a bit?
Sure. I'm very interested in hearing what he has to say.
Okay, perfect. Again, anybody who's watching this, I appreciate you coming on here. Michelle, are you with me? I think she might be on mute, but we have Michelle Freed here, who's the producer of Midnight in the Desert, who talked John into doing something risky like this, and I'm glad he did. And Thom Powell, who's been a researcher, a colleague, and a friend of mine for years now. I think this is the perfect matchup, so I'm happy to have both these guys on board doing this. And if you guys want to see more of this, let us know. You can get in touch with me at strangebrowradio@gmail.com. Also, within your little virtual world, wherever you are in quarantine, you'll see 3 polling questions there. And if you could find those polling questions and answer those when you have time, they're very simple questions. It's just about the future of this and how it might be shaped so we can do it. I encourage you to go to Strange Brow Radio podcast and listen to all the episodes on there. Like, subscribe, and share the content, because this is what we bring to you, as well as Michelle's radio show, Midnight in the Desert. And Michelle, tell them a little bit about what you have going on.
Well, a couple things. We have the radio show, which is Monday through Friday, 9 p.m. to 12 a.m. Pacific time. And this was Art Bell's show. When he left Coast to Coast, he started Midnight in the Desert, and he passed about, we're all coming up to 2 years in April. And we decided to continue his, I guess you could say, legacy. And we have kind of broadened the topics that we talk about on the show. So that's really good. And then I'm also teaching a remote viewing class to just kind of teach people the basic, how they can answer any question that they ever have, and do it themselves. And it's a really fun class, and you can get all the details on butterflyeffectcenter.com. And if you have any questions, just let me know.
And as someone who's taken Michelle's class, me and my girlfriend Erin and a couple others, we are about the 5th or 6th week of doing so. I can tell you that her technique works. And as someone who's totally fresh, totally green, the results have been encouraging. And I'm not saying it's easy, because when you're learning from someone who's, as well versed in this as Michelle, and who she's been trained by, it takes a learning curve. It is literally working a new muscle. It's a new craft, like martial arts, and you have to practice it every day. And it's something that I think we all have the innate ability to do. Would you agree, Michelle?
Absolutely. And John, you would say the same too, right? We could all do this.
Well, what I say is that these are human. In fact, I have a problem when we start talking about paranormal, because these are really exchanges, extensions of what is normal. And I think it's like any other human activity. There are people who are better than others, but if you practice, you can improve.
Absolutely. And boy, do we practice.
All right. Yeah, no, it's a perfect thing to do while you're in a position like this, folks. I mean, you have the time on your hand to do something. You've maybe thought about doing it, and now you can reach out to Michelle at the Butterfly Effect Center.com. Correct, Michelle?
Correct.
Okay. Well, without further ado, south of me, about 5 hours in the old town Oregon, Portland, Oregon. Keep Portland weird is what they say. And I promise you what Thom has to share with you will definitely go in the weird category, which is where we like it. He is the author of 3 great books. It starts out with The Local, ends up with The Edges of Science, and of course in between that is Shady Neighbors. I should also mention before we move on, of course, from John, is that the book Reality Denied, Firsthand Experiences with Things That Can't Happen But Did. Again, both these books are available on Amazon. And,
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to get back to that, both of those subjects in a minute, but take it away, Thom Powell.
All right. First of all, do you see my screen up there?
We do.
All right, good. All right. Well, before I get into my deal, just a few quick suggestions. This is my copy of John's book, and it's pretty sad shape, but it's been scrutinized pretty thoroughly, and there isn't a thing that he says that I don't agree with. As far as what's going on and how is it all explained, the universe included, this one, I think, offers an interesting paradigm that may or may not explain, well, most things that are mysteries to me. This is one of my favorite books on the UFO subject. He just died fairly recently, Jim Mars, but really thorough. When it comes to the cattle thing that John was describing, this is the seminal volume by Chris O'Brien. He's in New Mexico. He's studied the cattle mutilation thing more than anyone that I have ever found. And he basically lays it at the doorstep of environmental sampling, that the cattle and maybe even wild herds are carrying pathogens, specifically, mad cow or Jakob, Creutzfeldt Jakob, but that our food supply is compromised in the cattle mutilation thing is an indication that other entities are aware of it, and it may be their food supply too, suggesting that they're not from somewhere else, but they reside at least some of the time here on Earth just as we do, and they rely on our food supply as much as we do. When it comes to the deterioration of the samples, that the flesh that came off that wolf that they shot at, they find that when they exhume these giant skeletons in part of the Midwest, the same thing happens. As soon as the skeleton is exposed to the air, it undertakes a rapid deterioration. They also talk about the giants, of course, a lot, and the idea that, at least historically, there was a group of entities, and they lay it again at the door of the trickster and all
Tom,
of that.
Tom,
Yeah.
just so you know, what we're seeing on the screen is your cartoon. And
Oh,
so all we
okay.
see with you, you have to hold the book up.
All right. So where's the camera? Is my face showing, Toby, or
What you need to do, Thom, is just hold the book up a little bit higher.
like that?
There you go. Yeah.
Okay. This is the last one, and I know that John was also interested in this crop circle business, and it is fascinating, especially the way the individuals who investigate this come to a lot of the same conclusions that both John and I over the years. This is the Giants book, just to show it to you if I wasn't holding it properly before. This is the best book on cattle mutilations right there, Chris O'Brien. Is that showing up, Toby?
Yeah, you bet.
All right, good. And of course, then this, I think, does a lot of good to explain what may be going on, even intergalactically. This book is, of course, one of the best, and this is John's. And then right up there with John's is this one by Jim Mars. So there's a suggested reading list for anybody who wants to look into the subject a little more thoroughly. All right, well, anyway, those are my two. And the second one, Shady Neighbors, is a novel, and it basically took 10 different people's personal experiences and rolled them into a single character for sake of plot. So everything happened to somebody, but not everything happened to the same person. But it's basically all of the things that I collected in the process of putting together this one. And this one came out in 2001. And I asked John when he was talking about what was the circa where he was working at the Skinwalker. And the curious thing was that this is when he was working there, it was essentially the same time that I was conducting my research in West Central Washington. And as John said, the groups tend to be isolated from each other. And that was definitely me. I was completely unaware of the work that they were doing at Skinwalker, and yet I was finding a lot of the same stuff. So that led me to the third book, the most recent one, in which I more or less suggest that all of these phenomena do have some connection to each other, and there's a good amount of overlap. The big question that people always put to me is, if Bigfoots exist, why can't we prove it? And a very interesting answer is suggested by this pair, Holiday and Wilson. This book goes back a few years, completely out of print, but they found in trying to study the Loch Ness Monster that the same kinds of thing happened that we're finding out. Sometimes it's very definitely there, and the other times it's very definitely not. If you ever find a copy of this book at a used bookstore, grab it. It's out of print, and I consider it priceless. Well, so the question that maybe John is kind of asking for some background on, and that I get all the time is, what is Bigfoot? Do you really believe in Bigfoot? And I don't really believe in Bigfoot. I don't see it as a belief or an act of faith, but rather an unanswered question, maybe even a scientific one. Whether it's a person, a group of animals, extraterrestrial, ghosts, or spirits, I guess the answer is yes, all of the above. Well, I think the only fallacy is, have you found it yet? Being one of the questions I often have to field, and it's not an it, it's a they. And it does seem that they exhibit characteristics of all of these phenomena at various times. But I think in general, it's, to me, represents sort of a spirit being, and that, of course, is something that Native Americans have long said. This puts us into the category of the woo-woo, or woo for short, as Lauren Coleman, one of our longstanding researchers, started to it's a sort of semi-derogatory term, but that's fine. I can live with it. The new word, of course, and when I say new, I think it sort of emerged into the lexicon in the 50s or 60s, and that is paranormal. Before the word
quick break. Are you aware that your polling thing has jumped up in the middle of the screen?
I don't see any.
It's not yours.
Yeah, I don't see anything on mine. Some little thing showed up.
Being broadcast is coming from.
We moved that away there.
Okay.
No, go ahead, Tom.
All right. So anyway, paranormal, it's sort of a dirty word on the one hand, but it's also, I think, a word that just attempts to describe the fact that it's very difficult scientifically, maybe impossible to study this thing. So when people say, I want proof, come on, Tom, where's your proof? I say, boy, I wish I could give it to you, but it seems to defy the very nature of the phenomenon. simply because in order to prove something, we have to assemble a body of evidence, and that doesn't seem consistent with what the phenomenon is willing to give us. So that puts us on the horns of this dilemma. Are they flesh and blood creatures? I certainly started out hunting for what I thought was a wild ape or some sort of undisclosed creature, but no different than, giant pandas or coelacanths. It's just something that we haven't found yet, and I definitely evolved in my thinking. I don't look at that anymore. So just to make a joke out of the schism that exists in the world of Bigfoot research, I do have several friends who are still of the belief that it's a wild ape, and then there's those of us who see it as something paranormal. So that's the dichotomy there: the apers versus the woo. My suggestion, my resolution to this conflict is: you do it your way, I'll do it mine. Let's all trade notes at the end of the day and see what we get, hopefully over a beer. But we just want to share out. But I have no problem with people who are setting cameras in the woods. I encourage them to do it, even though I gave up on that a long time ago. The reason I gave up is because I tried to do science for over a decade, and after getting nowhere, it was finally explained to me by a retired CIA person, interestingly enough, who I know here in the neighborhood. And he told me, look, what you're doing is not science. You wish you could do science. You're intelligence gathering. And it's very different, because intelligence gathering implies that you're taking unverifiable bits of information and then trying to assemble a picture, none of the information being utterly worthy of the category of science. So basically, it means that I wish I was a scientist, but when it comes to studying this stuff, I'm really more of a spy. And I do what spies do, which is try to get to the bottom of a mystery that may emanate from something that is more intelligent than we are. I like to use the example of Osama bin Laden. We didn't catch Osama bin Laden using science per se. If there's any truth to the O Dark 30 representation, the one analyst who sort of figured it out was going on hunches and instincts based on this unverifiable stuff. And of course, in the meetings, she was frustrated by everybody wanting to put a percent of confidence to something that she just felt like she completely understood but could not convey to the satisfaction of her scientific-minded brethren. So really what this boils down to is this problem that science has. Science is reductionist if we follow the scientific method, but holism suggests that you have to look at the big picture if you're going to assemble an accurate portrait of what's really going on. And then, of course, I think these two words are sometimes not distinguished and need to be. It's always assumed that whatever's going on comes from space, and maybe the little craft that we see are thought to be spacecraft. But is it possible, and I think it is possible, I mean, it's a rhetorical question, that these entities that we're dealing with are not from somewhere else, but rather reside somehow, somewhere, either in a different dimension, if you want to call it that, but it may be subterranean. And a lot of the Indian information suggests that no, there is a subterranean element to what's going on the planet. And then, of course, the other possibility is this interdimensional thing. I tend to think that interdimensional really is a way of traveling. I think that the beings that we're dealing with are three-dimensional as we are in their own realm, but this interdimensional is just a way to get from here to there in much less than the usual time. Anyway, evidence versus understanding is where I am now. I've stopped trying to collect evidence because I understand that it is a different way of working than I don't want to prove it anymore. I know that I can't, but I am more interested in understanding the phenomenon. And so that, I think, implies a very different way of approaching the matter in the field. So science versus intel. Like I said, we are really intelligence gatherers. We're in a pre-scientific condition, and maybe someday we can do science on these things. But right now, all we're doing is looking for patterns and realizing that we're dealing with something that is intelligent and it's rogue. It is staying out of sight, and it's not going to cooperate with our attempts to sort of pull the curtain aside and expose the phenomenon in flesh and blood terms. So we have to accept these unverifiable observations and also accept the fact that we're dealing with this intelligence that often manifests itself as trickery. Well, when I wrote this book, I did find that back in the early 2000s, I was saying things that were radical at the time, but are not radical anymore. That we were getting a DNA tissue, but it was human. I was suggesting populations extended continent-wide, that they were staying hidden, they were intelligent, but also that there were people who were interacting with the phenomenon locally, and this was a phrase that was coined by Jane Goodall, Diane Fossey, to talk about their work with mountain gorillas, but it's the idea that you can buddy up. And I think that's what they were doing in Skinwalker, is they're basically trying to accustom the phenomenon, whatever it was, to their presence and seeing if they couldn't bring it to the fore. Yeah, there's cover-ups. I think largely the cover-ups are being abandoned these days because the information has really, the floodgates have opened, and you get so many people like John who are sharing information from the inside and the outside. I think the cover-ups that were once in effect are no longer being aggressively pursued. It does seem that the UFOs have a connection to the Sasquatch phenomenon, specifically the orb business. You get people looking for Sasquatch and they see a bunch of orbs, and there are people who say with a straight face that the orbs are a manifestation of the Sasquatch phenomenon, maybe just a different way of, shape-shifting on all of that. And then finally, I did have a chapter in the locals which talked about communication. In other words, there is a line of communication with these beings. It was suggested by some editors that I leave that chapter out because it was too radical. This was in 2001. Well, I did leave it out, but that became the first chapter in the next book. One of the most interesting things that I ran into when I was looking into the locals was this family in the southeast corner of Oklahoma, the Humphreys family, that were having regular visitations by the Sasquatch. They felt that they were stealing things out of the fridge. They were messing with the house at night, scaring the inhabitants. And so finally, one of the residents got fed up with the whole thing, took a shot at the thing. It took off, but it left blood. The group I was working with, BFRO, tried to collect the blood. They were unsuccessful. A mysterious rainstorm moved in and washed it all away before they could get there. Meanwhile, I was working with cameras in the woods, just like John was. And again, this is 1999, so this is commensurate with his work at Skinwalker. This was one of my little sets, and the little box under the bench was a car battery that powered that camera that you see dead center. And then I was doing things that I myself laugh at by today's standards, putting out apples and things and seeing if they got, and I was getting, the food was always getting rearranged, but not always taken. And I just wasn't getting the kind of results that I wanted. Well, meanwhile, I got involved with this group, Bigfoot Field Research Organization, because I was looking for one of these magic spots where people might be interacting. I knew that Mount Rainier was a hot spot, and that's not very far from James Gilliland's place up there by Mount Adams. There was a family that lived near Mount Rainier, and they were amenable to my setting trail cams. And for 2 years, we did various means of camera deployment in this woodsy location that was about 32 miles from Mount Rainier on the west side of the Cascades. They had a refrigerator that was being hit, so that was a target for our cameras for a while. And I also went up there and slept out because I was told, oh yeah, the activity goes on at night. And I said, well, why don't I just sleep out? And they thought that was a pretty bold thing to do, but I just felt like, oh, I don't think anything bad is going to happen. I did sleep out. It poured rain. I sat there with a camcorder in my sleeping bag under a tarp. I could hear activity moving around me just as promised. And as soon as I pulled out the camera, everything stopped. Well, that was just one anecdote, but it was my first indication that they were on to me. Of course, being scientifically minded at the time, I just wasn't buying it, so I had to double down on our deployment. So here is one of the early sets of video that we were doing, and it bears extraordinary similarities to what John was describing in the Skinwalker situation. And as you can see here, that I made these crude attempts to conceal the sets in birdhouses. The upper birdhouse had an infrared illuminator, so I had to remove the side of the birdhouse so that it would shine out in the direction of the camera. And then the second camera, the camera, was in this birdhouse, and it was looking right out through that little window. So we left that up there for quite a while, I mean, over a year, and then we got even more sophisticated with our camera sets and got this motion activated computer stored. You know, we had an Intel engineer working with us, and he was able to do this motion capture system that you're looking at a frame from right here. And there's your date, 12/31/00, I think. And so we sat with our cameras for a long time and getting absolutely nothing. Then one of the big Bigfoot activists in the area, Ray Crow, steered me toward the first of the psychics or the sensitives, whose name was Steve Fredericks. He told me in all honesty that he felt he had a line of communication with the beings that he had established in this place called the Salmonberry River, a steep wilderness drainage on the Oregon coast. So I said, all right, Steve, you think you got it going on? Here's what I want you to do. I want you to see if you can request some cooperation. So far, we've had the cameras out for close to 2 years. We've gotten a big fat nothing. Would you please use your alleged power to ask permission? I didn't tell Alan and April that I was doing this because I wanted it to be sort of a single blind experiment. Neither end knew. Steve Fredericks didn't know where the location was specifically. He did say, I want to drive around the general area, but I don't need to know the place. So I gave him the area of Onalaska, Washington, west of Mount Rainier, and he took a drive around there with his sister. And Alan and April knew nothing about this, but within 48 hours of Steve Fredericks trying to tender a request, I got a call out of the blue from Alan and April saying, hey, we just got some really decent video. And so I said, I'll be right up. I jumped in my car, drove 100 miles, and this is what was waiting for me. Not exactly something that's going to rock the world, but what you see here is a shadow moving left to right across the screen. It's really only 3 or 4 frames, and there you see that it happened on December 30th. Anyway, we were very encouraged because this was the first time we got something, even though it's not a very good something. It does kind of look like a head and shoulders of something moving across the screen. But the point is, we got this within 48 hours of asking permission. And Steve Fredericks, I did not tell Steve Fredericks that we got any results. But I did go back to Steve Fredericks and say, Steve, we need to do another experiment. I want you to ask for a bone. And Steve Fredericks said, oh, they're not going to like that, Thom. Well, he did. And here, let's stop that. And within 48 hours of asking for a bone, again, through this sort of logging on to what I like to call the coconut telegraph, Steve Fredericks tendered the request. And he said, oh, they didn't seem too interested, Thom, but I did submit what you asked. I did my best. 48 hours later, Alan and April call me and say, we just found a bone at the base of the camera tree. So I jump in my car and I drove up to Mount Rainier, and this is what they handed me. It's about the shape of a coffee saucer, a little bit more oblong. As you can see, it's very thick. and it's very porous. So I took this to a wildlife expert, and he said, that's definitely a bird bone, but I don't know what kind. And it doesn't seem like you could have a bird whose head would be that big, but it kind of looks like the top of a skull. So I kind of researched around for a little while myself, and then I took it to a fellow down the road from me who raised emus. And on instinct, I showed him the bone and said, might this be part of one of these odd birds that you raise from New Zealand? He pulled out a reference text and he found that it perfectly matched the breastbone of an emu. So I took it back to Alan and April, said, are there any emus around here? Alan said, my dad raises emus 5 miles away. I said, well, what does he do when the emus die? He said, he throws them in a pit out back. I said, is there any way an emu bone could get 5 miles from your dad's place to here? And he said, well, not that I'm aware of, but at least we do know that there are bones somewhere in the vicinity. Finally, Alan and April decided after 2 years plus that we were done with the project. They were getting indications that they were being monitored, their phones were being tapped, all this usual stuff. So they said, we want to get on with our life. And I said, that's okay. We've been doing it for 2 years. I'm ready to stop. At that point, and only that point, I told Steve Fredericks about the pictures and then the bone. Steve Fredericks, upon hearing about the bone, said, well, he hit himself in the forehead with his hand, and he said, you know what, Thom? I never specified what kind of bone. I just said we would like a bone, but I never said one of your bones. Of course, it's sort of arrogant to expect that these creatures would dig up one of their brethren and give us one of the bones, but it was one of the indications of this trickery. They were dealing with something that has a sense of humor, just as John described in his work at Skinwalker. So here were my conclusions, and this is where I put together the edges of science. I said, we're definitely dealing with paranormal entities. It cannot be studied scientifically, and it does seem that they connect to other phenomena because we're getting things that other field observers are describing. Ron Moorhead likes to say, if you haven't had electronics disabled, you haven't been doing it very long. He said it's a real commonplace occurrence in the Sasquatch game, but here John is describing it with the cameras on the pole in Skinwalker. John described this uncomfortable vibe. That's a commonplace situation, even with people who don't even expect that it's a Sasquatch around them. All they knew is they felt this horrible vibe and they needed to leave the area. You get the repulsive odors associated with the Sasquatch thing, but even people who study crop circles, ghosts, and so on do report this same strong odor. And it seems like even when more than one person experiences the odor at the same time, they describe it very differently. Some people say it's dog poop, other people say rotten eggs, other people say rotting garbage. It seems like everybody describes it in terms of the worst smell that they've ever experienced. So it seems like what's happening here is a certain button in our brain is being pushed, and that is the really repulsive smell that makes you sick to your stomach. As John described, and as I found repeatedly at Alan and April's, it's like they knew when I was coming before I got there. As soon as I slammed the door on my car, everything stopped. As soon as I left, things would resume. They knew about our cameras and they were averse to them. One of the things that Alan's wife April had, she was walking the property one day and she heard words very clearly saying, "Quit trying to trick us." When she described that to me, I knew that it was a reference to our cameras, because by then we were moving the cameras from place to place around the property as the phenomenon would shift its location. Every time we put the camera somewhere, it would stop. So there is no doubt in my mind that they know cameras and that they're averse to them. Of course, they had other phenomena at Alan and April's place. Here's a good one. They had what they called a ghost train. They had an old logging railroad grade that went through their property. Tracks were long gone, ties and everything torn up long ago. Every once in a great while, a train would go down the easement or the old railroad right-of-way, and with such force that it would rattle plates off their wall. They got the telepathy, quit trying to trick us, and come out and play. Their daughter would get it the most. She would get woken up in the middle of the night with these directed messages that were pretty benign, just kind of come out and play. We want to see you. And we were certainly getting indications that it was all intelligently directed. So here's a list of things that I think most paranormal researchers can agree with at least in part. Now, here is one of my go-to guys. This name is Henry Franzoni. He's been studying the Sasquatch really aggressively since the Peter Byrne days of the late 70s and very aggressively into the 90s. So all three of these people are Henry in different points of his life. This is his book, and he draws heavily on Native American stuff. And here's what Henry Franzoni has confided in me based on his decade upon decade of investigation. He says they emanate from underground. They have to. These stick structures that we find just are not in any way the kind of shelter that you would think that they would need. There must be an underground element to what's going on. They may have caves that go there, but they don't need them. They can move through solid matter. They are telepathic with all organisms. They can take control and knock you cold if they want to. Henry likes to say they move between frame rates, which is sort of a reference to, movie film. That if you speed up movie film or slow it down, then of course the way you perceive it is different. That they're moving between vibration rates. They can go invisible and they can shapeshift. They are very skilled at logical principles. They're ultra efficient at using available resources. They have a complete absence of our environmental impacts. If they are representing a earthbound population, is very strictly controlled. They are masters of deception and acute in their sense of humor. Well, so those are some conclusions that not only Henry shares, but they also come from a lot of Native Americans who basically saying that for years. And then you go down to Shasta, kind of the West Coast center of paranormalism, and you get with the people who are looking for Lemurians and things that reside under the mountain or under the ground near the mountain. And again, they come up with the same kinds of things. This is one very shamanically oriented individual that I know, Alyssa. She now lives in Utah, but she lived at Shasta for a long time. She has two books. One's called Influenced, and the other one's called Spots of the Fawn. And it basically references these power spots on the landscape. Alyssa's really well read, and she put these books in front of me, and I did my best to digest all of them. But the main things that came from my contact with her are these ideas that there's a fine line between science and spirituality. Spirits need us as much as we need them. These power spots, of which Skinwalker is no doubt one, but Alan and April's being another, and my property on the Clackamas River seems to have what you could call a vortex. It could be a wormhole. It could be a portal. Alyssa calls it a spot of the fawn. And not only are there these highly charged power spots, but it's also very important that your presence there in some way interacts with these things. So the way they're described by Alyssa and a lot of other people, and feel free to jump in here, John, high EMF readings. You got water and spring, underground activity. They're often seen as sacred sites by Native Americans, but even in Europe, the Neolithic structures and cathedrals are all built on these ancient power spots. But places like Shasta, Sentience Ranch, and so on are these things that we now start to see as power spots. But Alyssa would emphasize it's your consciousness is also an important part of what's being happening there, which brings us to our basic conclusions. And that is, as John was describing, every time you took Jesse Ventura or anybody else there, everything dries up. Well, what's going on with that? Well, Freddie Silva, who's a big crop circle guy. He wrote this book, if it's showing. And he says, you know, it just doesn't happen on demand. Spirituality is not a circus act. And I like that idea real well. Henry Franzoni says, I can tell you what Bigfoot is. I can't tell you what Bigfoot is. You have to figure it out for yourself. If I told you, you wouldn't believe me. I like that. Another quote that sort of chimes in, there are things in this world you're not supposed to know. And I think John was hearkening at that a little bit with their experiences. It's Skinwalker. Even Jesus said, well, you know, it's only for you. It's not, as Freddie Silva said, it's not a circus act. And Alyssa would say, the only proof you're ever going to get is personal experience. You can have things happen to you. You can sit there at Skinwalker, Allen and April's, or wherever for months. You will have a handful of experiences over those months, as John described, but you're just not going to get something that you can take to the bank. And it harkens of this idea of alchemy from 17th, 18th century. This idea that when you want to make mercury into gold, it's a combination of science and spirituality. That consciousness is making things happen. It's you being there that is part of it, and consciousness is something that exists outside the brain. The brain inside your body is responding to directions from consciousness, and consciousness is something that exists outside the body, as do your memories. Therefore, your memories can be accessed by other sentient beings, and this, I think, helps me at least understand how these things can know that we're coming. How can they know what we're doing and know what we're planning even before we do it? Because thoughts and perceptions from outside your body do direct things that happen inside your body, even at a cellular level. Memory, as I said, exists outside the body and is backed up in the brain, and consciousness outside your body can make things happen. And I think that to me is a big part of what the Sasquatch and some of these other phenomena are doing by way of changing the world and shutting us down and knowing that we're coming, so on and so forth. It just won't perform for your friends. Well, these are some of the people who weigh in heavily on this. As John, of course, already said, he's buddies with our guy Jacques Vallée, but here are some other people who go into this stuff in a big way. This is one of my favorite guys, Graham Hancock, and he's a big advocate of this kind of stuff. So back to this, the Goblin Universe. Look for this book if you can find it, but it's basically what they're saying too. You get things that are moving in and out of our world. They're not going to cooperate with our agenda to get videotape. But they are sort of maybe trying to usher humanity into a higher consciousness, a greater awareness, a greater respect for our surroundings. You know, now I'm going down the eco rabbit hole. Sorry about that. But one of the things that people do get who are trying to communicate specifically with the Sasquatch is a concern for our environment. One person that I know who was trying to do the telepathic contact with the Sasquatch said, well, if you give us evidence, we can take it to the world and we can show that you exist, and therefore we can help maintain your, we can preserve you as a species. And the answer that she got back was, we don't need any protection. You're the ones who are endangered. So I thought that was a little bit cogent. So the Goblin Universe, it's the menagerie of entities that visit our existence. Sasquatch are perhaps one of the most conspicuous members of the menagerie. They are watching us as though we are animals in the zoo. And their role is in some form heavy lifting. They might have had something to do with these ancient Neolithic structures, pyramids, you name it. They do, I think, observe and report to higher powers, and they are under directions to stay out of sight. One of the attempts to communicate through another sensitive named Bob Faust, we asked, can we see you? Will you let us see you? And the answer from the entity that was presumably in our immediate environment was no, it's a rule. I've never been seen by you people, and I'm not about to screw up now. It's definitely something that's not allowed within their culture, society, or whatever it is you want to call it. So I think that for the most part, when people do have sightings, they are more deliberate than people realize. They are more directed than people realize. They are not just matters of happenstance and so on. Put all this together, what do you get? The earth is alive. It's generating these phenomena for our edification. There are intelligent beings that probably reside within the earth who come and go from our world. I mean, after all, subterranean could be another dimension. We inhabit sort of two dimensions of the world, forward, back, side to side, but we really don't inhabit the third dimension very often. That is the subterranean realm. But it does seem that there are beings that can move through these realms into our world. And what this all says to me is that these phenomena overlap. And like I said before at the beginning of this speech here, these are phenomena that seem to be common to most, if not all, of these paranormal areas of investigation. So there you go. It's more or less attempted at summarizing in the edges of science, but I do understand that people who haven't really experienced some of this for themselves go, man, Thom, that's just too messed up. I get it. The Skinwalker is a Navajo term. It basically means these malevolent witches. And one Navajo person told Henry Franzoni, here's how you tell where there's Sasquatch in the area. Count the trees on your way down the trail, and on your way back down the trail, count the trees again. You will get a different number. And that's because the beings can represent themselves as trees. But there are other manifestations of the Sasquatch phenomenon, and here they are, the giant skeletons probably being the most interesting and surprising one, that just thousands of these things have been exhumed over time. And if you want to know more about that, this is the book right here. Okay, I think I'm sort of there. So thanks for listening. And now I guess I would love to hear what John, how much of this stuff John agrees with. But the one thing that I think John Keel used to say back in the 70s is, when you study them, they study you. And when John Keel was looking into the UFO world back in the 70s, that was a big conclusion that occurred to him.
All right, there's your cliffhanger. And if you want to hear the rest of this, I believe there's another hour available, and you can find that at patreon.com/strangebowradio. So here's how this is going to work, folks. December 1st, the show is coming back as season 1, and there will be 4 episodes per season. I'll announce the future dates, but the next episode you'll hear, if you're listening to the show as a regular listener and not a member, December 1st will be the winter season, and then I'll give up the extra dates after that point. Now, with that said, there was something coming your way already in the works. November 17th, 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, there will be a 3-hour show for you and everybody else in the world who wants to watch it. It'll be a Zoom connection, again, with Ira Wolfnesen and some guests. The entitled webinar coming forth is The Connections Observed Between Alien Abductions and Mystical Experiences. Now, if you want to watch the show, you got to go to the Strange Brow Radio Facebook page, and there it will be streamed live and then uploaded to the YouTube page for the members. But we will have the regular show available as it's streaming, but it will be archived for the members only. So you want to definitely catch that, because Ira is an experiencer, an abductee. She has been taken, as well as, well, I shouldn't say she's been taken. I'll leave that up for her to phrase. But scheduled also, we do have people that have been taken. Now, some of them call themselves experiencers, or this is some kind of mystical experience, but others call them abductions with experiments. And so we're going to have that, polarity of issues here. I always want to be able to have that back and forth. So again, November 17th, it's a Zoom webinar on Strange Brow Radio Facebook page, and it will be uploaded for the members as a video and audio content. So you can find that there as well. Don't forget to check out our sponsors, especially during this holiday season. Go check out our sponsor, Feral by Erin, ERYN, at Etsy.com for alchemy sound tools, museum quality, functional, working. God bless her for the amount of work that she does making these beautifully handcrafted, hand-honed, hard to explain. You got to go see them for yourself at Etsy.com. Fantastic spirit tools by Erin Jackson at Feral by Erin. And I got to get Erin on the air more with us, and especially talking about her work and all that goes into it, because I see it here on the property, and have even assisted a couple different times on a couple different projects, including a Sasquatch drum that we recently did as a commission. So again, that's Feral by Erin, ERYN, at Etsy.com. And then I have my own Etsy store in the making here for my new revised, revamped Wood Watchers, realistic Sasquatch heads that you can have in your she shed or man cave or anywhere in between. And no, these are not nasty homages to a headhunter instinct. These are mid-cloaked Bigfoots punching a hole in space and time and peeking into your living room. That's what I mean by that. So I don't need the Sasquatch version of PETA on my case. No. So if I don't see you in November, I don't see you in December, I don't see you at Patreon, then by golly, I better see you in the tree.